The first night in the shelter felt colder than winter. The metal bunk beds were hard and made a squeaky sound every time someone moved. The thin mattress did nothing to stop the chill from creeping into Amina's back. She lay on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry. Below her, little Zuri held onto her old teddy bear like it was the only safe thing left in the world. The bear was worn out, one eye missing, stuffing coming out from the side. But Zuri pressed it to her chest like it could protect her from everything. Around them, the room was filled with quiet sadness. Some women whispered. Some cried softly into their pillows. One baby coughed in the corner. The air smelled like soap and tiredness. Amina kept her eyes open, listening to every small sound. She didn't want Zuri to wake up and see tears on her face. She wanted to look strong, even if she didn't feel it. Her phone buzzed in her hand. For a second her heart jumped. Maybe someone cared. Maybe someone changed their mind. But it was just a random notification. Without thinking, she opened social media. And that's when she saw it. Picture of her childhood home. Clean. Bright. Newly painted. Available for rent, the post said. Across town, the house where she learned to walk, where her grandmother baked bread in the kitchen, was now being advertised to strangers. Amina swallowed hard and looked down at Zuri sleeping on the cold bunk. They were homeless. And their home was up for rent. The memory still felt fresh like it happened yesterday. It was only a few weeks after her husband was buried. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt empty. Amina was still wearing black most days. She was barely sleeping, barely eating, just trying to breathe without breaking down in front of Zuri. Her parents called her into the living room one evening. The same living room where she used to do her homework as a child. The same couch where her grandmother used to sit and tell stories. But that day it didn't feel like home. Felt like a courtroom. Her father cleared his throat. Her mother crossed her arms. Amina, you need to be realistic, her mother said. You've always been financially irresponsible. Those words hit harder than they should have. Financially irresponsible. She had just lost her husband. Hospital bills had drained their savings. Funeral costs were still unpaid. She was grieving, not careless. I'm trying, Amina said quietly. I just need a little time. Her father shook his head. Time is money. And we can't keep carrying you. As if she was a burden. As if she wasn't their daughter. They told her she needed to leave. That the house was too small. That they needed peace. That she and Zuri were too much stress. She stared at them, waiting for someone to say it was a joke. Waiting for her mother to soften. Waiting for her father to say, "Of course you can stay." But it never came. She packed in silence that night. Zuri folded her tiny clothes carefully, not fully understanding what was happening. "Are we going on a trip, Mommy?" she asked with innocent eyes. "Something like that," Amina whispered, forcing a smile that hurt her face. When she carried the last bag out the door, she turned back and looked at the walls. Every corner held a memory. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Her wedding send-off. Her grandmother's laughter in the kitchen. Her mother didn't hug her goodbye. Her father didn't help with the bags. The door closed behind her. Weeks later, Amina passed by the street again. She told herself she just wanted to see the neighborhood, just to feel something familiar. That's when she saw a moving truck parked outside the house. Two strangers were carrying in a gray sofa. A woman stood at the door smiling, holding keys. Keys that used to hang on a nail by the kitchen. Amina froze on the sidewalk. Zuri held her hand. "Mommy, who are those people?" Amina couldn't answer. Her parents stepped outside, laughing with the new tenants. Laughing. Like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't pushed their widowed daughter and granddaughter out with 2 suitcases. It wasn't about space. It wasn't about stress. They had already planned this. They had already decided she didn't belong there anymore. Amina stood there for a long moment, watching strangers walk into the house she grew up in. Watching someone else close the front door. And in that moment, something inside her cracked. Not just her heart, her trust. Amina tried to tell herself she was overthinking it. Maybe her parents really needed the rent money. Maybe things were worse than they admitted. Maybe she was just hurt and seeing everything in a darker way. But the truth came to her on a random afternoon. She was standing outside a small grocery shop near her old street. She didn't even know why she went back there. Maybe she just missed the familiar roads. Maybe she missed the version of her life that felt safe. As she stepped out of the shop, she heard someone call her name softly. Amina. She turned and saw Mrs. Naidu, the neighbor who had lived next door for as long as she could remember. The same woman who used to bring over sugar when they ran out. The same one who attended her wedding. Mrs. Naidu looked around before walking closer, like she didn't want anyone to hear. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said quietly. Amina's heart started beating faster. "About what?" The older woman hesitated. She looked uncomfortable, guilty even. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said. "But you deserve to know the truth." Amina felt her stomach tighten. "Your parents didn't need the money," Mrs. Naidu said in a low voice. "They told everyone they were renting the house for extra income, but that's not true. Your father's business is doing fine. They just wanted you out." The words didn't make sense at first. "What do you mean?" Amina asked, her voice barely steady. Mrs. Naidu sighed. "I overheard them talking one evening in the yard. They said you were becoming too dependent, that if they didn't push you, you would never learn. They said the house was the only leverage they had." Leverage? Like she was a problem to manage. Like her grief was a weakness to fix. Amina felt heat rise to her face. "So it wasn't about space." Mrs. Naidu shook her head slowly. "No, my child. It was about control." Control. The word echoed in her mind long after the conversation ended. Suddenly everything made sense. The cold tone. The lack of sympathy after her husband died. The rush to get her out. The quick move to rent the house. They didn't see a grieving daughter. They saw someone they could pressure. Someone they could shape. Someone who needed to be taught a lesson. Amina walked back toward the street where the house stood. The curtains were different now. New flowers in the yard. Strangers' shoes at the door. Her parents weren't struggling. They were comfortable. They had chosen to push her out. And the worst part wasn't losing the house. It was realizing her pain had been used against her. That her weakest moment had been seen as an opportunity. She stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, trying not to fall apart in public. It was never about money. It was never about space. It was about power. And for the first time, instead of just feeling hurt, Amina felt something else rising inside her. Not sadness. Not even anger. Clarity. It was one of those nights when the shelter felt extra quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy. The lights were off, but soft yellow light from the hallway slipped through the door. The metal bunk beds creaked every time someone turned over. A baby cried for a few seconds, then stopped. Somewhere across the room, a woman whispered a prayer. Amina lay on her side, facing the wall. Zuri was curled up next to her on the narrow mattress, her small body warm against Amina's arm. The old teddy bear was tucked under Zuri's chin. Amina thought her daughter was asleep. Then she felt a small tug on her sleeve. "Mommy." Zuri's voice was soft, careful. "Yes, baby," Amina whispered, brushing her fingers through her daughter's hair. There was a long pause. Like Zuri was thinking hard. "Mommy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa want us?" The question didn't sound angry. It didn't even sound sad. Sounded confused. And somehow that hurt the most. Amina's chest tightened so fast it felt like she couldn't breathe. She had prepared herself for hunger. For cold nights. For starting over. But she wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for her child to question her own worth. "Why would you say that?" Amina asked gently, even though she knew the answer. Zuri shrugged a little. "If they wanted us, we would still live there, right? We wouldn't be here." The innocence in her voice shattered something inside Amina. She turned quickly so Zuri wouldn't see the tears forming in her eyes. But her daughter noticed anyway. "Did I do something bad?" Zuri asked in a tiny voice. "Is that why?" That was it. That was the moment Amina broke. She pulled Zuri close, holding her so tight it was like she was trying to protect her from the whole world at once. "No," she whispered fiercely. "No, baby. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Do you hear me? This is not your fault." Zuri's small fingers clutched her shirt. "Then why don't they want us?" Amina swallowed hard. "How do you explain pride, ego, control? How do you explain that sometimes adults choose power over love?" She kissed Zuri's forehead. "Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean we're not wanted. I want you. More than anything." Zuri nodded slowly, like she was trying to understand something too big for her age. After a while, her breathing became steady again. She fell asleep. But Amina didn't. She stared at the dark ceiling, Zuri's question echoing in her head over and over. Why don't they want us? It wasn't just a question. It was a wound. And in that pain something shifted. All this time Amina had been surviving, just trying to get through each day, trying not to drown in grief, trying not to fall apart. But now it wasn't just about her. Her daughter was starting to believe she was unwanted, and that Amina could not accept. Tears rolled silently into her pillow, but her heart felt different, stronger, harder. If her parents thought pushing her out would break her, they were wrong. If they thought she would disappear quietly, they were wrong. They could question her strength, but they would never make her daughter question her worth again. That night, on a cold metal bunk bed in a crowded shelter, Amina made a silent promise. She would not just survive, she would fight back. A few days after that night, Amina went to the small storage unit she had rented with the last of her savings. It was on the edge of town, dusty and quiet. Most of the boxes inside were things she didn't have space for at the shelter. Old clothes, photo albums, kitchen items, and papers she never had the energy to sort through after her husband passed away. That afternoon, Zuri was at a free activity program at the shelter, so Amina was alone. She pulled one box closer and wiped the dust off the top. Written in faded marker were the words, "Grandma's papers." Her chest tightened a little. Her grandmother had always been the only one who made her feel truly safe in that house. Warm hugs, fresh bread, soft advice. After she passed away, everything changed. Amina opened the box slowly. Inside were old envelopes, notebooks, and files tied together with a thin ribbon. The smell of old paper filled the air. She sat cross-legged on the cold floor and started flipping through them without much hope. Old receipts, bank letters, utility bills. Then she saw something different. Thicker envelope, official-looking. She pulled it out and noticed a property stamp on the top. Her fingers froze for a second. Her heart started beating faster, though she didn't know why. She opened it carefully. Inside were copies of property documents for the house. She frowned. Why would her grandmother keep copies here? Amina leaned closer and began reading. The legal words were confusing at first, but one phrase caught her eye. Joint ownership structure. She blinked. Joint. Her eyes moved down the page slowly. The original owner, her grandmother. Then years ago a partial transfer had been made. Her father's name was there. And then, she stopped breathing for a second. Name. Amina stared at it, thinking maybe she was imagining things. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. There it was. Printed clearly. Included in the structure. Not full ownership, but partial. Her grandmother had quietly added her. No big announcement. No family meeting. Just paperwork. Silent protection. Amina's hands began to shake. All this time, she believed she had no right to that house. That she was just a guest who overstayed. That her parents had the final say. But according to this document, the house wasn't fully theirs to control. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they felt different. Not helpless. Not broken. Her grandmother had seen something coming. Maybe she knew how things could turn. Maybe she understood how power worked in that family. And instead of fighting loudly, she had done something smarter. She had written Amina into the foundation. Amina flipped through the rest of the papers. There were signatures. Legal stamps. Everything looked official. Her parents never mentioned this. They acted like she had no claim, no voice. But on paper she did. She pressed the documents against her chest and let out a shaky breath. For the first time since being pushed out, she didn't feel completely powerless. They rented out the house. They called her irresponsible. They told her to leave, but they forgot one thing. She was already part of it, and now she had proof. Amina didn't tell anyone at the shelter about the papers. Not yet. She was scared to hope too much. Scared it might be a misunderstanding. Scared the documents meant nothing. But she needed to know the truth. A few days later, she sat in a small law office downtown, holding the folder tightly in her lap. The sign on the door read, Tabo Makona. She had found his name through a women's support group. They said he was fair, straightforward, and not afraid of difficult family cases. The office smelled like coffee and old books. Law files were stacked neatly on shelves. Amina felt small sitting there, like she didn't belong in a place where people understood complicated legal words. Tabo walked in, calm and professional. "You must be Amina," he said kindly, shaking her hand. "Tell me what's going on." Her voice trembled at first, but she explained everything. Her husband's death, being forced out, the house being rented, a shelter. Then she slowly placed the documents on his desk. "I don't know if this even means anything," she admitted. "I just found it." Tabo adjusted his glasses and began reading carefully. The room went quiet except for the soft turning of paper. Amina watched his face for any reaction. First he looked neutral, focused. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. He flipped back to the first page. Then forward again. He murmured. Amina's heart started racing. "Is it real?" she asked softly. "Oh, it's very real," he said. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her directly. "Your grandmother partially transferred ownership of the property into a joint structure. That means this house legally belongs to more than one person." Amina swallowed. "Including me. Including you." The words felt unreal. He tapped the page with his pen. "Which means something very important." She held her breath. "The house cannot legally be rented out without the consent of all joint owners." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said clearly, "if you did not sign any rental agreement or give written permission, the lease your parents signed with tenants is legally flawed." Amina stared at him. "I never signed anything. No one even told me." Tabo nodded slowly. "Exactly." The room felt suddenly warmer, louder, like the world had shifted. "They can't just push you out and act like you don't exist," he continued. "You have rights. And based on this document, those rights were ignored." Amina felt tears fill her eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from something she hadn't felt in months. Validation. "So what happens now?" she whispered. Tabo closed the folder calmly. "Now we take action. Because legally speaking, your signature was required." He paused for a second, then added, "And it was never given." For the first time since she left that house with 2 suitcases, Amina didn't feel powerless. She felt dangerous. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she finally knew the truth. They thought she was alone. They forgot she was an owner. Amina didn't tell her parents she was coming. She chose a Saturday afternoon. She knew that would be the safest time. Tenants home, neighbors outside, no secret conversations behind closed doors. Her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast as she walked up the familiar street. The house looked the same and different at the same time. Fresh paint. New curtains. Someone else's car in the driveway. Zuri was holding her hand tightly. "Are we visiting?" she asked softly. "In a way," Amina said. She knocked on the door. A young woman opened it, one of the tenants. She looked confused but polite. Hi, Amina said gently. "I used to live here. Are my parents home?" Before the tenant could answer, her mother's voice came from inside. "Who is it?" Then she appeared, and froze. For a second no one spoke. Her father walked into the hallway behind her mother. His face turned pale when he saw Amina standing there calmly, holding a folder. "What are you doing here?" her mother asked sharply, glancing nervously at the tenant. "I came to talk," Amina said, her voice steady. Not angry. Not loud. Just clear. This isn't the place, her father muttered. It actually is, Amina replied. The tenants were still standing nearby. You could feel the tension in the air. The hallway suddenly felt too small. Amina opened the folder slowly. I recently reviewed the property documents for this house, she said. Specifically, the joint ownership transfer signed by Grandma years ago. Her mother's face changed. Just slightly. But Amina noticed. I don't know what you think you found, her father began. I found my name, Amina interrupted calmly. Silence. The tenants exchanged a quick look. Amina continued. According to the legal documents, this house is jointly owned, which means it cannot be rented out without the written consent of all owners. Her father's jaw tightened. You don't understand legal matters. I understand enough, she said quietly. I never signed any rental agreement. I never gave permission. That makes this lease legally flawed. The word flawed seemed to echo in the hallway. The tenant holding the door shifted uncomfortably. Wait, what does that mean? She asked nervously. Amina turned to her gently. It means you were not told the full truth. I'm not here to cause trouble for you. But you deserve to know the situation. Her mother's voice rose slightly. This is family business. It became legal business when you rented it, Amina replied. Her father stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're embarrassing us. Amina looked at him steadily. No. You embarrassed yourselves when you pushed your widowed daughter and granddaughter into a shelter while renting out a house she partly owns. The words landed heavy. Neighbors had started watching from outside. Curtains moved. Doors cracked open. For the first time, her parents didn't look powerful. They looked exposed. Amina closed the folder gently. My lawyer will be in touch, she said calmly. I just wanted to give you the courtesy of hearing it from me first. She squeezed Zuri's hand and turned to leave. As she walked down the driveway, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt steady. They thought she would stay quiet. They forgot she had proof. And now everyone had heard it. The courtroom was smaller than Amina expected. No dramatic movie scene. No loud arguments. Just a quiet room with wooden benches, a raised desk for the judge, and a few people waiting for their cases to be called. But to Amina it felt huge. She sat next to her lawyer, the folder of documents resting on her lap again. Her palms were slightly sweaty, but her back was straight. Zuri was not there. Amina didn't want her daughter sitting through this. This was a fight she would handle herself. Across the room, her parents sat together. Not looking at her. Not speaking to her. Her mother's lips were tight. Her father kept adjusting his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. When their case was called, Amina's heart jumped, but she stood up calmly. The judge listened as Advocate Tabo Makona explained the joint ownership structure. He spoke clearly, confidently, pointing to the dates, the signatures, the official transfer from Amina's late grandmother. Then he said the sentence that made the room go completely still. My client's consent was legally required before the property could be rented. Her father's lawyer tried to argue that Amina had no practical involvement in the property, that she was not living there, that it was a family misunderstanding. But the judge wasn't interested in emotions, only facts. He reviewed the documents himself, quietly, carefully. Amina could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Finally the judge looked up. The documents clearly indicate partial ownership under a joint structure, he said in a calm, firm voice. This means any rental agreement required consent from all listed owners. He paused slightly. There is no record of Ms. Amina's signature or written approval. Her mother shifted in her seat. The judge continued. Therefore, the lease agreement is legally incomplete. Rental income received must be accounted for and shared proportionally, retroactively, from the beginning of the tenancy. Retroactively. The word felt powerful. It meant this wasn't just about stopping them now. It meant they couldn't pretend the past months never happened. Her father opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, he added, any attempt to exclude a legal co-owner from property decisions is invalid under the law. Invalid. Just like that, The attempt to push her out, the attempt to act like she didn't exist, officially failed. The gavel tapped once. And it was done. No shouting. No drama. Just truth, written clearly into record. As Amina walked out of the courtroom, her parents rushed past her without making eye contact. The same people who once told her she was irresponsible now couldn't even look at her. Outside, the air felt lighter. She closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. They tried to remove her from her own foundation. But the law didn't forget her name. And now neither would they. After the court hearing, things didn't change overnight. Life still moved slowly. The shelter was still the shelter. Metal bunk beds, shared bathrooms, the constant quiet sadness of people waiting for better days. But something inside Amina had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding. One afternoon, she checked her bank account on her old phone. First she thought it was a mistake. The number on the screen was bigger than anything she had seen in months. A retroactive payment. Money from the rental income that had been collected while she was pushed out. Money the court had ordered to be shared with her as a partial owner. She stared at the digits for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't a fortune. Not even close. But it was enough. Enough to think beyond the shelter walls. Enough to plan. That night, she sat on her bunk bed and took a deep breath. She thought about Zuri. About the small plastic bag they still used to carry clothes. About how her daughter deserved a real home, not just a temporary bed in a crowded room. So she started searching. Small apartments. Nothing fancy. No luxury. Just 4 walls and a door. A place where they could wake up in the morning and feel like they belonged. Took days of phone calls and viewings. Some places were too expensive. Others were too far. A few landlords looked at her address history and hesitated. Shelter addresses made people uncomfortable. But she didn't give up. Eventually she found it. A tiny apartment on a quiet street. Not big. Not perfect. The paint was slightly faded, and the kitchen was small. But it had a bedroom for Zuri and a little living space where they could sit together in the evenings. When she signed the lease, her hands didn't shake. She paid the deposit with the retroactive money. And just like that they had a home. It wasn't the house she grew up in. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even close to the life she once imagined. But it was theirs. No shelter rules. No crowded rooms. No uncertainty about tomorrow. Dignity. That was the word she kept repeating in her mind. Not luxury. Dignity. Zuri jumped up and down in the empty apartment, laughing. "This is our house, Mommy." "Yes," Amina said, smiling for the first time in a long while. "This is our house." It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, her phone kept ringing. Her parents' names flashed on the screen. Again and again. Calls she didn't answer. She looked at the phone for a moment, then placed it face down on the table. Not out of anger, but because for the first time she was choosing peace. They had made their choices. Now she would make hers. Forward. Months passed slowly but surely. Life didn't change in one big explosion of luck. Changed in small steps. Hard work. Decisions. Healing. Amina went back to the house. The same house where everything had fallen apart. She didn't go as a beggar or a guest. She went as a partial owner. Legally. Only. With papers in hand and a clear mind. The renovations started small. A fresh coat of paint. Fixing broken tiles. Cleaning corners that had been ignored for years. She wasn't trying to erase the past. She was rebuilding something better. Her portion of the house became something new. Small daycare center. She named it after her grandmother, the woman who had quietly included her in the property documents years ago. The woman who believed in family and care and second chances. Children's laughter filled the rooms. Tiny hands playing with toys. Small voices singing songs. Zuri loved it. Every afternoon after school, she ran into the garden. The same garden where strangers once walked in and closed the door on their old life. Now it was full of flowers and sunlight and laughter. She picked little petals and showed them to her mother. "Look, Mommy. I made a bouquet." Amina smiled. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a good life. A life built on dignity. One afternoon her phone buzzed. Her mother's name. Message. Can we talk? For a moment, Amina stared at it. Memories came rushing back. The arguments, the eviction, the shelter nights. She took a breath. Then she blocked the number. Not out of hatred. Not out of revenge. But because peace mattered. The house they rented out while she slept in a shelter. She had reclaimed her portion. Legally. Rightfully. They thought she was powerless. They forgot the truth. She was never homeless. She had rights. And now she had a future. Closing line. They rented out our home while we slept in a shelter. I rebuilt. I opened doors for others. They thought we were gone. They forgot we still belonged.